Oh, we still have participants coming in, but we can start right now. It's time. So welcome to this APRU Global Health webinar. Today our topic is on academic integrity. Well, in the past few years, while we were in this pandemic situation, academic integrity has become a kind of a serious problem in teaching and learning. And especially after the AI to like ChatGPT came out, people started talking about this very intensively. So today we have three amazing speakers, Claudia, King, and Jack from different countries to join us to talk about their opinions, share their experience regarding how to enhance academic integrity and encourage students' integrity sense in academia. So before we start today's presentations by our speakers, first, please let me invite Professor Melissa Withers from the University of Southern California. She is the program director of the APRU Global Health Program. Please let me invite Melissa to give us the opening speech. Melissa, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Xiao, and thank you to everyone for joining. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this special webinar. I wanted to just take a moment to talk to you about the APRU program. If you have never heard, I am delighted to see many familiar faces in our network here of people who have joined our other working group on global health education and technology webinars. So thanks for being here. So the APRU network is a nonprofit network of 60 leading universities in the Asia Pacific region. It's been around for more than 25 years now. And the Global Health Program is one of several programs under the APRU umbrella. So APRU is the Association of Pacific Rim Universities, and its secretariat is located in Hong Kong. But the APRU Global Health Program is housed at my university, the University of Southern California, located in Los Angeles, California, and I'm the director of that program. And as Dr. Xiao mentioned, we have had a lot of interest in further professional development of our faculty and instructors around issues in pedagogy. And so this is why we have organized this webinar today. And I would like to acknowledge Dr. Xiao is the chair of the working group on global health education and technology. And I would also like to thank our three wonderful experts, really international experts on these topics that have agreed to be here and speak to us today. So let me introduce our first speaker. The format is our speakers are going to speak for about 13 minutes or so. Then we'll have some time for Q&A, a couple of questions. Then we'll have our second speaker, a couple of questions. And then at the end, actually, if we don't get to all of the questions, we do have some more time to have more of a discussion and to answer more questions. So please stick around for the end because you'll have more discussion, more opportunities for Q&A. Great. So let me go ahead then and introduce our first speaker, Dr. Claudia Tobar, who is the Chief Innovation and Outreach Officer at Universidad San Francisco de Quito. I'm going to be there. I'm leaving tomorrow for your university. So excited. She also teaches in the undergraduate program of education. She is editor-in-chief of Para el Aula magazine since 2012. She serves as director of Lupini Community Children's Library and has offered workshops to teachers in Ecuador and Latin America on educational and current pedagogical topics, and a TEDx talk in 2021. She's the author of several publications and research on education, an activist on children's rights, and has a doctorate from Northeastern University in organizational leadership. And she's here to speak to us about ChatGPT and academic ethics. So welcome so much, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Melissa, for that kind introduction. I'm so happy to be here. And there's something I like to annotate before I start. Since ChatGPT is so new, we have 5 months in discovering this new technology and having access to this technology that I wouldn't consider myself an expert. I think we are all experts that we are just curious about learning about this technology and the concerns we have. So I just wanted to have that step before I start. So I am going to share my screen to share some slides I have prepared for today to talk about this topic that's certainly amazing and I think requires all of our attention as academics in what's the future about education is going to be like. So I think it's very important to start talking about just this technology, right? So by January, it had 100 million users. It has around 25 million daily visitors. The knowledge it uses, ChatGPT, is based up to 2021. So it's not necessarily up to date, the information it uses. And there's around 10 million queries per day. That's an estimate, and it's growing every day. So it's important for us to know that this technology is learning every day by every time users are entering the software, right? So I think it's very important to state that there are some limitations of the software itself. We are now using the ChatGPT version 3 and version 4, it's coming. And the improvement it's going to have by version 4 is really exponential, because the software is learning itself how to stop the possible errors it can bring. Right now, the limitation it has is that ChatGPT cannot access the internet itself. It uses a database, as I said, up to 2021. It cannot read links. It can only provide information and answers to questions by the text it was trained on. And ChatGPT knowledge is limited to its training, as I said, from 2021. And ChatGPT can give wrong information. And this is something very important to know. So when you think about what's the real difference between ChatGPT and just Google, is that the intelligence behind is not just giving away information. It's making associative decisions using the information it has. So I think it's important to state that in the past, as human beings, we have used technology in many ways, and technology has been present ever since humanity started developing intellect. So any tool, any process that we have used to improve or be more efficient, that's technology. When we use a hammer, or when you use any tool that it's not necessarily electrical, it could be defined as technology. Obviously, in the past years, we have seen technology grow so fast, and it has become a vital part of our daily usage, right? So we have to reflect on the fact that any tool or process of activity that is not adding value to us as humans can be or should be replaced by technology. So right now, for example, if you have a calculator in hand and you could do very complex calculations, a calculator can do it for you. And while you're not doing those calculations by hand or by mind, you can be creating or making new associations within your technology. So in concept, technology can make us more efficient. And also it's important to say in academic integrity, also plagiarism has existed since the beginning of education. Like students have been very clever in finding ways of using plagiarism. And I remember during the pandemic that many of the discussions we have as academics where students were at home, and how are they doing the exams? Are they really there? Is somebody doing the exams for them? Are they using more text than we want them to? So all of these proctoring tools arose in the pandemic to really help us understand if really students were doing their job. And I want to state this because students also can use GPT as a form of plagiarism. And it's important to know that this is just another of the many mechanisms students can be clever about in using this. So this is just some of the ways that in the past students have plagiarized, right? So before, I think in a very traditional way, education has focused about giving or teaching students to give answers, to provide answers for tests, for questions in the classroom. But really, when you have this technology available for them, it's not about just giving the answers, it's about making the right questions. So this actually goes inside the very basic objectives of education, because if now students can ask ChatGPT basically anything and they can have an answer for it, it's not accessing the knowledge, is how to use that knowledge to do something more productive. So how can we create learning experiences that could leverage education through this technology? And I think we had a debate yesterday at my university with the president, with some students, with some faculty members, and we were discussing the fact that it's very important for us as educators to rethink how can we give away assignments inside the classroom that, regardless the use of GPT, we can still look or grade or assess the intellect of our students. But if we continue to maybe provide traditional assignments, the use of ChatGPT is almost given. So it's important, before we start talking about maybe the influence of ChatGPT, is talking about what is intelligence. I think both artificial intelligence or regular human intelligence are based on the same thing. We need to have background knowledge as humans in order to have some base to associate and problem solve, right? If we could just use this basic definition of intelligence, artificial intelligence is pretty much the same. It uses a lot of data, that's the big data, to, with all that data, make some connections to associate and solve a problem. ChatGPT is doing exactly the same thing. So it's using this huge database to provide answers using on all of the previous information it has on its database. It's important to state the fact that it's not only about asking questions, because if you don't have a background knowledge as a human being, the answer this technology is going to provide, you're not going to understand. For example, if you say a prompt to ChatGPT, something like, please provide me a code for a ping pong game, the machine is probably going to provide a very elaborate coding, right? In any language you ask the machine to do it. But if you don't have any previous knowledge about programming or coding, you're not going to understand, or you're not going to know if that coding it provided, it's correct, right? So it's important to state that in both types of intelligence, you need to have background knowledge. So the bigger the database for artificial intelligence, or the more background knowledge for human intelligence, the better the associations you can make and the better informed decisions you can make on it. So this is why sometimes ChatGPT makes very incorrect answers. It's because it's using a database and it's not actually processing the information. It's just using associations of the frequency of the algorithm of what has been said before to make an answer. So it's maybe if you can use this example, it's like a gossip, right? So you're using some type of information and you make assumptions and associations to provide a gossip. So you heard that somebody, for example, in your department is getting fired. And you, by the information you have, you start making assumptions and associations, and you state a fact that it's false because you don't have enough information. So what's happening now, and this is an example I wanted to share with you, is that in this panel we had yesterday at my university, I used ChatGPT and I asked the machine to give me a bio for my president of my university. So I made some context, right? So please provide a bio for my president. He is a swimmer, he's an anthropologist, and he's tech savvy. And with that information and the information it had on the database, it provided me a very thorough bio, but it used a lot of prompts that are used for bios. So what it means is that many of the things that the machine was making up, it could be correct for anybody. So it's like when you go to the witch, right? And they read your cards. Probably what they're saying is something that it's probably going to be true for 90% of the people that they're getting the cards read to, right? So it's important to understand that it is going to provide a lot of errors, but in the general sense, because it's using the association from this big database, sometimes it is very true. So both intelligence are based on data. And you need to know something, to make the right question. So humans, we need to understand that in education, we have to provide students with the knowledge first in order for them to provide the right questions. And the thing is that we have been, for human beings, outsourcing many things for technology. So as far as we know, ever since we had calculators, we have been outsourcing the processing of making calculations to calculators. Ever since we have GPS, our georeferencing has been outsourced to GPS. So nowadays, if you don't have Google Maps or any of those technologies, sometimes we feel lost because we have relied so much on that technology. Also, there are so many programs that proofread our documents for us, right? The text edit, Grammarly, or any of these apps that correct the text for us have been making us a little lazy in not doing the work ourselves. So we have been outsourcing many of our processing to technology. But I think the real question, and what makes ChatGPT even bigger, is that, are we ready to outsource thinking? Because that's, I think, the main difference. When we are overusing this technology, and we tend to overuse ChatGPT, we lose the habit of making arguments, of researching, or really writing or providing the right answers to many questions. So it's important to understand that ChatGPT should be a tool, not a substitution. And I think that's the main difference. If we use it as a tool for referencing, for example, I have to admit that before I made this presentation, I went to ChatGPT and asked, what are the main ethical concerns of the use of ChatGPT? And ChatGPT itself gave me a list of possible concerns that we could, as academics, be engaged to. But that doesn't mean that I could plagiarize and substitute my presentation only with that answer. It's a tool, just like any proofreading tool or any GPS. We have to do the work ourselves. And I think it was very curious that I found this publication that says that in 1988 there was a riot of math teachers that were against the use of calculators. And many academic institutions have had a very similar position towards ChatGPT. Should we ban ChatGPT? Should we have a formal position in our universities that we stop students from using that because we are so afraid of them just plagiarizing, right? All of the arguments and ideas it had. So in that way, we are developing so many proctoring tools to identify if students are using ChatGPT instead of thinking themselves, instead of writing the essays themselves. So we are developing all this elaborate and very sophisticated software and finding mechanism to block its use. But then that really it's not the solution itself. It's finding how can we navigate this tool to be a leverage and not be a mechanism of plagiarism. And I think that's the real challenge we're facing too. So it's important to understand that ChatGPT is just a tool, and we have to see it that way. It's a very elaborate and sophisticated tool, but it never should be a substitute. And that is something that has to be discussed with students, the limitations of the tool and how it could be used properly. And I think it's very important for us also to stop and ask students, what are they using the GPT for? Because I think in some ways we're just assuming that they're using it to plagiarize. And I think that is a very dangerous assumption, because maybe there are some students, obviously, that they are doing that, but many others are using it as a tool for mentoring, for understanding, for academic support, for referencing, for connecting, for being just curious about so many topics they can be engaged, and they don't have access to many high order thinking people next to them that could be answer those sophisticated questions. So I just wanted to share an example that happened in our university. Matt Duloff, a colleague of mine, he's the coordinator of the Writing Center. He shared in the panel yesterday that he assigned the midterm essay for their students, and 5 out of 15 students, 1/3 of the class, had 100% plagiarism in their midterm essays. And we're just seeing this, and Melissa, before the conference started, she shared that they are seeing in her university also some of these issues of 100% plagiarism in essays. D2L, for example, or Turnitin itself has a new mechanism to detect AI plagiarism in students' essays. Right now it's only available in English, and I'm sure it's going to be available in other languages soon. But if you ask your students to write their essay in English and you look at the AI detector, it can tell the percentage of similarity to the AI. And what's funny about the response is that obviously these 5 students presented an essay that was 100% a response that was just copied and pasted to the delivery of the assignment. The funny thing is that this colleague of mine said, okay, if my students are going to do their essay on ChatGPT, I am going to grade them on ChatGPT. So he just copied the whole exam and put it inside the ChatGPT and said, please, ChatGPT, could you grade this essay for me? And what's funny is that this answer is going to reveal the real functionism, the real logic of functioning of the ChatGPT. So first, what it said is that, oh, this is a very well-written essay, and I would assign a 90 out of 100 to this essay. And it's funny because it was a perfect written essay, actually, but it somehow did not assign 100%, and it gave some very specific feedback on the content. And it said that the students made some examples and some connections with the essay prompt, and it was well written. And then what's funny is what's said at the end. ChatGPT said, if the essay would not have so many typos or grammatical errors, it would be a very great essay. So Matt, who is a writing professor, so he's an expert, went back to the essay and went looking in every line for the typos and for the grammatical errors. It turns out the essay had 0 grammatical errors and typos. Then what's happening? You understand that the ChatGPT is not reading the document you are sending. It's making assumptions of all the feedback writing professors do across the globe, and what are the most common feedback comments teachers give to students on their essays. And it pulls the most frequent, and that's the magic of the algorithm. So what's the most common comment on essays for students in college is typos, grammatical errors, that they have a well-written structure, that they need more argument. So what the tool is doing is just taking the most common feedback comments from faculty members around the world and putting it in that box. So it really makes you understand that it's really not making the correct assumptions. The bigger the database, the...
Sorry to interrupt, just a quick check-in on time. We're at 21 minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to make a wrap up soon. Thank you, Melissa, for that heads up. So it's very important to understand how it's done. So I'm just going to move ahead and look at what we're doing at USFQ. And we looked at the code of honor. And our code of honor internally from our university says that plagiarism, it consists of the attribution of ideas, words, and data works of another person in any form, regardless of the intention. So we find the loop in this problem because it says any person. So if a student commits plagiarism, they could go back to the code of honor and say, I'm not citing any person. I'm doing a software. So we just not need to change the laws that we have inside the university, but we need to change the way we conceive plagiarism itself. And I think we're trying to solve a problem that we really don't know exactly what the problem still is. And we have to start looking in the positive tools that can be used with ChatGPT. And that could be the possibility to have mentors for each student, to help students with any type of learning disabilities or learning aids. So there are so many ways that the ChatGPT could help students. And it could also help with the blank page syndrome, which is that sometimes you are stuck with not having anything to start on. And ChatGPT could be that first inspiration to help. So I think there are a lot of concerns, but there are, I think, many more things that we have to start looking that are very beneficial to help students and thinking that this could be the perfect mentor for many students to provide practice or guide. So I'll be happy to answer any questions after the other panelists speak.
We do have a question in the chat box, but because of time, if you don't mind, we'll leave the question to the panel discussion after all the three presentations. And it's really interesting presentation. Thank you, Claudia. So may I invite Melissa to introduce our next speaker, please?
Thank you so much. That was fantastic, and really got me thinking of it as a tool instead of as a crutch, really. Okay, so thank you. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Dr. King Chow is a professor of life science, chemical and biological engineering, public policy and environment. He heads the Dean of Students Office, supporting various student-oriented schemes beyond academic issues, including exchange programs, career development, and experiential learning. His focus of research is on genetics, development, evolution, and synthetic biology, but he engages in various teaching pedagogy initiatives and curricular development projects, teaches project courses, experiential courses, online courses, spearheads liberal arts and interdisciplinary education at the juncture cutting across science, engineering, social science, and humanity at both the undergraduate and postgraduate levels. He was the inaugural School of Science Teaching Award winner and was awarded the Michael G. Gale Medal of Distinguished Teaching at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Thank you, Professor Chow, for being here.
Thanks, Melissa, for the introduction. It's really my honor to be here to talk about that. So I think thanks for Claudia for the introduction about ChatGPT and all the issues that are associated with it. I'll probably take a slightly different approach to address the academic integrity issues for the university. Now, let me start off by simply asking, actually, what kind of issue are we talking about, academic integrity? So usually the people in the past, in the history, we are talking about cheating, impersonating, plagiarism. Well, but then actually, if you go on, you remember that the time that when Google and all this Wikipedia, they were out, people stopping going to the library. They would simply go out to the internet and then search for information. And how do they reference it? How do they cite it? Well, if you look even further, people would ask, how's it different from having a personal tutor, having somebody to help you, whether you borrow a book from the library and then you simply fail to cite it? Now ChatGPT. But how about even further? Academic integrity also cover area, for example, when the people working as a group. We have all heard that about in project work, there are free riders. They simply join in, but then actually they don't really contribute too much, but at the end, they grab the benefit out of it. So all this actually, it prompts us to ask the question, have our students learned? So I think that's really the question that we want to ask. Now, I want to touch upon two separate issues. One is that, why does that happen? And whether what we are doing with all this assessment, are we really achieving that goal? So I think let me go through that in a quick glance. Now, you simply need to pay attention at that all this highlighted area. Some of the reasons for the people who go through this cheating or plagiarism process, why are they doing that? So there are some common reasons. For example, well, they do want to do well. So they know that actually they may not be reaching at that level, but it is necessary for them to really do well as an outcome. So it is a cultural coercion for people to constantly maintain high quality performance. Are we doing that all the time? Probably not. Second thing, well, if they do well, there must be an incentive because actually they would get some benefit which other people don't. And sometimes in the modern world, actually, we have a problem of that the winner takes it all. So sometimes only one or two person or the top of the group, they would be able to get the benefit. The rest, they don't. So it is whether you get it, you don't get it. The third thing is the psychological. Some people, they don't want to be viewed as not performing well. It is really about the social status. It's really a sense of insecurity. Now, all this really prompts people to start thinking about how can I get ahead of the other? And probably if I cheat or I plagiarize or I use all the other help, it allows me to move ahead. But as long as nobody catch me, then I don't get any penalty. There's no consequence. So without that, essentially it comes down to one of the issue, which is, well, actually, whether we see doing something right or doing something wrong, whether does it matter? It is really a moral value that everybody would to think about. Now, I would try to equate this cheating or poor academic integrity as simply an issue which is really inborn. I call that, it is never justified. But then we need to understand that if we don't eliminate all these reasons, all these underlying issues, we are not going to get rid of it. So it is a psychological as well as a biological driven process. Now, let me go on and say, well, think about what's the situation that we have in the university. What are the types of university we have? Now, let me highlight that there are a few types of universities that we have today. Now, I look at this UNESCO information that I was surprised to learn that actually around the world, we have 19,000 higher education institutions around the world. A number which is way higher than I thought. I thought it's below 10,000. So among all this university, there is some of them, actually, they focus on really the intellectual development of the students, right? So therefore, they have a lot of interactions between one-on-one or group. So if they focus is really on about individual, how they develop themselves. They are also university, they focus on the knowledge creation, innovation. So they're doing research and all this. So all these, I would say, at the end outcome is really less quantitative in a sense, but they are measured in a very long term, how individuals develop over time after this educational process. How about some other? So we noticed that modern days university, after all this industrial revolution with the explosion of a large number of university, some of them focusing on vocational training. So for those, actually what they focus on are issues related to skill, certain practice associated with specific career. Now, so what would they be measuring? Essentially, they're measuring how they can place students into certain jobs. How about another one? So some other institution, actually, they are really basically a business operation. So they rely on the student to bring in revenue so that they can continue to operate as an institution. So what's the focus? How much funding they would be able to bring in, and how would they be able to get the financial gain from the students' tuition fee and all this? So therefore, they try to satisfy the market. Now, in all these cases, essentially, knowledge, skill, application, mass production, standardization, and monitoring the competency of the student and employability of the students, and whether they can get good job, how high the salary. This is the focus. Now, having that in mind, then we need to ask ourselves, well, what are we trying to do in these institutions when we introduce all these teaching and learning activities? What are we exactly measuring? I believe that no matter in what type of institution, we still focus on, well, we want to encourage and we want to assess the students actually how much effort they put into the learning, how much ability they have to draw on all this experience and knowledge and put it into practical use. Now, we are measuring understanding and their own intellectual development, or in some way that we would even say that how they get individuals transformed over a period of like a 4 year, 5 year, 6 years in a university education. Now, these qualities essentially reflect on the effectiveness of the education. And we believe that essentially later on, it will be translated into the success of this individual. Now, then we need to ask ourselves again, with this kind of institutional organization, are we interested in focusing on the long-term monitoring of the success of individual? Now, that's no guarantee. It is not directly, you can measure it quantitatively because success of individual can be measured over 5, 10, 20 years. Now, we want to like measure the short-term reward. For example, they land on a good job, good salary, they pass an exam or they get through a test. Now, having that in mind, then I would say, well, let's think about all the participants in this group. These students, currently we are talking about the student in the Gen Y or Gen Z, these are younger individuals. What's the characteristic of them? Well, they are more opportunistic. They are looking around to see what is available to them. And usually they have a very short attention span. We know that when we offer all this online course, each section is supposed to be like a 3 to 5 minutes. They can't last for longer than that. And they want to have immediate feedback. When they do something, they want to get the result. So in a way, they're really looking for something immediate, very short-sighted in a way that I would describe it. Now, in the backdrop of it, things are going in the opposite direction. The world is changing very fast, more rapid changes, a lot of new things coming out. And because of that, there are more uncertainty. And also the expansion of the higher education means that actually there will be a lot more competitors out there for jobs, for immediate opportunities. And therefore, they are also influenced by various social media. So there's a lot of social influence and coercion telling them actually what's the right way to do, what's the wrong way to do. Now, that's really the direction. So at the end, actually, our younger generation, what they're looking at is they want to be ahead of the other. This is the key objective. Now, you can see that how the two come together. So now we talk about academic integrity. Essentially, I would say that it is really about the steering one's moral compass in a community, how they act. So when we put in the university, we talk about, well, in the practice, how they do their original work, whether they credit the other, how they respect the truth, respect the observation or experimental data they obtain, and doing honest work. Now, all these are actually what we are talking about. Now, having that in mind, I would propose that, well, in fact, many universities are doing similar things, but I want to highlight them and see actually how we can improve it. Now, usually, I think for most institutions, we would have some sort of like a code of conduct and adoption of some sort of like a policy about academic integrity. Now, we all have it. Do we really advertise it sufficiently so that all the students would take it? Or they simply see that as another document that they can easily throw it away after they enter the university? And when is it disseminated and how is it being communicated? I think that's an important element. We have it doesn't mean that we practice it. The second thing is I believe that it is also done in many institutions, is really having educational modules about academic integrity. I believe that it is not something just for the student. It's something also for instructors and also from our faculties. Essentially, what it means is that we are constantly advocating it so that we are setting the expectation for everybody in this community. If we see the higher education as a commodity, the question is it a mandate exercise? Certainly, I don't see that practicing in many institutions, all right? Now, so having that, then we'll say, well, then we need to do the policing. The policing is that, well, we have all this various technology, we have people monitoring it, proctoring exams. So plagiarism check and with software, and also, for example, AI, I think that we just talked about it. Turn it in, get improved. There's like a copy leaks, that's the GPT-0. Everything's coming in. So we're doing the policing. We can be very good in policing. Wow, but after you identify it, what are you going to do? The next thing is that, well, whether you really penalize them. And if you don't penalize them, or the penalty is so mild, basically it has no deterring effect, it means nothing. Simply I identify that you plagiarized. So what, right? So I give you a warning letter, then you walk away, and no consequence afterwards. Well, so how serious an institution take care of that? I think it's important. And a more important part of it is that, well, how the remedial advising and coaching of the students to help them to reorient themselves to have a proper practice professionally. I think that's really an important part. Now, what I want to highlight is, well, in fact, a very important component of it is really a change of instructional and assessment format. It is not really something just as a policy, but it's really a daily practice. Now, what exactly is it about? I suggest that many of us have gone through a PhD study. We always say that you can give people an opportunity to write a thesis. Then you write everything in detail. In fact, ChatGPT may be able to help you to write the thesis. But then you know actually how we do the exam. The exam is that you go through an oral presentation, right? And then you'll be like a drill by the examination panel for like an hour or 2 hours or so. Well, questions come in all directions. Are they checking everything? No. But then actually they are talking about how you integrate all this information into some reasonable, practical solutions. And that tells us how you understand certain material and whether you can really use it. Now, so therefore, I think in terms of the assessment, I believe that we need to think about how to monitor this integration in any kind of novel context so that they can borrow or pull information that they have learned in the past, really internalize it and use it in real use. Now, I think that's really the case. And so therefore, with that kind of assessment, essentially, there's no way you can cheat or plagiarize. So we need to think about how to switch more focus on that type of assessment. And of course, I think for an institution, we need to think about long-term or short-term. So the assessment, I believe that it needs to be aligned better with all this type 3 or type 4, less with the type 3 and type 4 institution, focusing on the immediate return, but focus on the longer-term development of the individual. So, and demonstration by example by all parties, not just students, also instructors, faculties, that's important. And we also need to have the recognition of this individual to honor them. So in a way, that is really the motivation or to incentivize the process. Now, what would be the hurdle? Now, as I see that in a lot of the institutions around the world, having this kind of a vision and integrity of the institutional leadership, we need to demonstrate it by the senior leader. And we need to take a moral stance. I think that's a very important part. Cultural transformation of an institution, that means it's a shared value from student all the way to instructors. I think that need to be cultivated. And we also need to have a proper legal or moral framework being put in place, probably somehow incorporated into the policy. And of course, then for a lot of our instructors also, to change this kind of assessment or teaching mode, it is very time consuming. So the workload of the faculty, we need to consider how to alleviate some of this load. And of course, how to design all this proper assessment to really address the issue of learning. That's the most important part. And of course, at the end, we need to put enough resource allocated for individual or units. Now, proper recognition, of course, is also important. Now, having that in mind, I don't want to give you a very negative notion.
We're almost out of time, by the way.
As a biologist, we'll say that cheating is adaptive behavior. Cheating is a common phenomenon in nature all the time throughout history, because we compete for the resources for survival. And it cannot be eliminated because it's an adaptive consequence as a natural selection. So it always occurred in a small scale. You can never eliminate it. But then provided that it's not really damaging the bulk of the population, that is okay. But if it's too often, then the system will collapse. So in a way, I think that we are constantly balancing it. How to balance it is really what a university is supposed to do. So with that, I would say that the best way to deal with that is that, take it from sociologists. Sociologists, they always say that our social circle influence our morality all the time. Over time, specific acts most people commit or condone become like acceptable to us, but while acts that they condemn become unacceptable. So with that, I want to end this by saying that the best way to really deal with the academic integrity is really to surround yourself with people who help you to be your best, and then populate our campus with all these people who share that value and build an environment that honor this integrity. So it is easy to learn, but then it is really easy to damage too. And we need to take a long time to really build this culture. I think I would like to end it here with a little bit of an abstract way to look at how higher education and academic integrity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chow, for this thought-provoking speech. We do have a lot of questions in our head, and we have questions in the chat box, but because of time, we'll leave the questions to after all the three presentations, then we'll have a kind of intensive conversation discussion, because so many questions how we work in this AOI or integrity intensive academic world. Now, please let me invite Melissa to introduce our next speaker, please.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, I am delighted to introduce our third speaker for this evening. Jacques Zalma serves as the Director of the Office of Academic Integrity at the University of Southern California. In his role, Dr. Zalma leads the team responsible for investigating allegations of academic misconduct and implementing strategies to prevent such incidents from occurring. He holds a bachelor's degree in computer science from Cal Poly Pomona, sorry, and a master's and doctorate degree in education from USC. He's committed to encouraging academic honesty and creating a fair and equitable process for all students in partnership with faculty and staff colleagues. And he'll be speaking about effective course design and assessment strategies to promote academic integrity. So welcome so much, and thanks for being here, Dr. Zalma.
Thank you, and really, it's quite the honor for me to be here. And following a couple of great presentations, I recognize that I'm going to be addressing this topic from the lens of an administrator, sharing insights that I have learned from research and discussions with faculty and students. But I also want to share that I myself am not a faculty member, so I'm the lone black sheep here in this group. I truly am hopeful that I will be able to share some nuggets of information that will serve as inspiration and catalyst for what you might be able to implement in your work. I think that much of what my previous two presenters had shared are aspects of what I want to as well. So I'm going to try to just kind of glance over that so that we can leave some time for more questions that I think are coming forward in the chat. Firstly, I wanted to say that in order to effectively promote academic integrity, I think it's important that we understand some of the reasons why students choose to forego their integrity. And I think that Dr. Chow did a really good job of leveraging some of the reasons why that is. I think it's also important to say that while some, even a majority of incidents are due to negligence, more egregious violations tend to occur from free will. These include contract cheating, having someone take a class or write a paper for you, submitting fabricated documents. We're seeing an influx at our institution, unfortunately, of this, whether it be with research or even with documents to aid in admissions. And of course, there's always the catch-all of copying and pasting. So one of the things that I like to just kind of start off with is that while our students are trying to earn their degree and reach this level of success, that success without integrity, in my opinion, is failure. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to be looking at some of the more common reasons why students cheat. I'm going to really kind of go over these very briefly, as I think Dr. Chow did a really great job of bringing this forward. But I also wanted to take it from the perspective of how as educators, what we can do to promote ethical conduct in as well as outside of the university environment. As that is our goal, is to have our students be prepared for when they leave our university to carry our name with them in all of the work that they do. So some of the high level reasons, confusion. As was stated earlier, collaboration is probably one of the reasons that many of my students are unaware that what they were doing was wrong. I didn't know that I couldn't collaborate with students, especially if a majority of their classes encourage collaboration, and then they have one that says, no, all work has to be individual. And there's also a level of comfort with technology and a kind of disconnect in terms of what is or is not permitted. Technology has always been there for them. These are students that have never seen a world without Facebook, for example. And they're just so hands-on, ready to receive anything that comes through the screen. Changes to education have absolutely impacted academic integrity and choices that students have used, whether it's because of desocialization or just, as I said before, the access to all of the information that's ready. This is also something that they're going to be using in their professional careers. ChatGPT, for example, is not something that is just used in academia, but will be expected of our students to know how to use it effectively in the workforce. And so for that reason, I think it's really important that we look for ways that we can integrate the technology and not have it be a substitute for what we are teaching, but part of the learning curriculum. Stress and anxiety, students feeling depleted, feeling that there's no other option. I have no choice. I need to submit something. And so therefore, I'm going to submit something that I didn't write myself. And that goes hand in hand with procrastination, not effectively managing the time, having multiple responsibilities that they are responsible for, so that their focus is not solely on education, and that when it comes time to submit an assignment, they realize that they didn't put forward the amount of time that was necessary. And I think Dr. Chow also mentioned this with risk assessment. If there is a lack of likeliness that they would get caught, or that the penalty for getting caught is not severe enough, then the risk versus reward analysis makes it an easy determination to say, I'm going to engage in this and hope for the best rather than prepare for the worst. So I think that takes us into the intent versus impact of cheating. My office, when we meet with students, we ask them to reflect on the choices that they've made and the parties that have been harmed by those choices. Oftentimes, students are thinking only of the fact that they are under this stress, this need to submit material, whether it be an assignment in an undergraduate course, or even a proposal for a dissertation. All of this encompasses a great amount of stress, and recognizes that they're kind of looking at this from a perspective of very much tunnel vision. Rarely are they thinking of those harmed. And I usually use this metaphor of the fact that when you throw a stone into a still lake or a still pond, sure, it makes a big splash, but what we don't see are the ripples that impact and how far out those ripples go. So thinking about the harm that was done to the instructors, the faculty, those who have put effort and time to teach you, to get you to a point of learning, and only to feel that that has been subjugated by the fact that you have taken this out of their hands and have engaged in some form of misconduct. What about the students who are actively pursuing degrees with you, and the impact that this has had on the value of the degree that's being earned? I talk to my students and say that I have 2 degrees from the University of Southern California. And so any form of cheating impacts the value of those degrees that are hanging on my wall. And it might impact others from considering coming to the university. So, in short, these short actions These short-sighted actions have a long-lasting impact. So I really want to focus on how we can create a culture of integrity. So rather than just focusing on the negatives, while it is important to address the fact that academic misconduct occurs, I think we can be looking at how do we encourage and promote the act of integrity. And I think part and parcel with that is working hand in hand, faculty and administrators. This is not just about how do we change the pedagogy, but rather how do we also change the values and the impact that the university will take. What are we saying to our students if all we are doing is issuing a warning and saying don't do it again, as compared to having some intervention that's intentional and impactful? From a logistical perspective, I, as an administrator, will ask faculty to be specific and explicit about what is both permitted and prohibited. With that, I encourage faculty to explain, whether in writing in their syllabus or in conversation with their students, about what kinds of actions have taken place in the past that would be seen as a violation. And furthermore, explain the value. Why is it important? What are the long-term impacts? How is this potentially going to impact their future career goals? I work with computer science students, as I have a bachelor's in computer science, and I will share with them that while they may not be thinking about the fact that sharing work with other peers would be a violation, that if they were to do that in their career, that could be seen as copyright infringement, that could be seen as a violation of a non-disclosure agreement, that could be seen as a potential liability from a proprietary standpoint. If they were to submit work that they didn't do themselves, but submitted to their supervisor, and it were to be included in the code in the project that they're working on, how that might create legal barriers as well. So getting the students to be thinking beyond just the scope of obtaining the degree, but looking long-term at their values and their goals is really important. And then lastly, of course, is also increasing the resources, allowing students to come to you and be able to address it prior to it being a problem, to look at how we can provide assistance so that they can feel more secure in the work that they're given. It's really important to acknowledge that ignoring academic misconduct will not make it go away. Just like ChatGPT, we can't stick our heads in the sand and hope it gets better. ChatGPT is here. It is not going away, despite the fact that Elon Musk and many other scientists have asked for it to be paused. It is only going to increase in its both use as well as in its skill. And so with that, as I said, we need to be specific. We need to be repetitive. Do not just limit the opportunity to talk about academic misconduct to the first day of class and keep it on the course syllabus. Don't have it be something that just people scroll to the bottom and click I agree, like we do with any kind of agreement, whether it be for iTunes or any other software application. It's important that we are consistently talking to our students about academic integrity and integrity in general. We should be an academic integrity ambassador to celebrate learning and remove the motivation of cheating. That means looking at what is our assessment? How are we determining learning? If ChatGPT can pass our class, have we done a good job in creating the lessons and structures to encourage learning? I absolutely agree with what Dr. Chow said about flipping the classroom and providing more of an opportunity for both the written and the oral work so that we can really engage collaboratively to determine what is it that we are learning. And then be supportive, be empathetic, understand the stress and the anxiety that students are going under without relying on the fact that that's an excuse for poor behavior. Stress and anxiety is always going to be there, and it becomes a bandwidth issue. It can become a debilitating impact on our future. But if it's not addressed here with support, it will only furthermore impact our students' lives throughout their career. So in terms of course assignments, and again, let me preface this by saying I am an administrator, not a faculty member. But some of the things that I have heard from faculty that I've engaged with and students is to scaffold assignments, provide the opportunity to submit multiple assignments throughout. This will help with procrastination. If you have, at the end of the course, you're going to provide me a 10-page paper, but we're going to provide 1 page every week, that becomes something that is digestible. Encourage in-class presentations, as I said before. When looking at the exams, same, but different. Create multiple versions. Make sure that the exams are accessible only during specific windows. And when I say different versions, don't just rely on reframing or reorganizing the questions, but rather create different questions. Have them get to the same construct. If we're looking at math, for example, have it be with different numbers, but have it be to address the same topic. Understand that screen capturing exists, and with all of the proctoring software that's out there, it will still exist. Your exams, any work that you are providing, you should be under the impression that it is already on Chegg, on Course Hero, on sites that students have access to. And so if you are reusing your assignments without making modifications, you should assume that you're likely going to get the same responses over the course of several semesters or terms. And I think it's also important to, in whatever way we can, to make sure that our students know it's not just about earning the grades, that the reason that we are here and learning is so that you can take this experience, improve, and go forward and be successful in your careers. And that's regardless of whether or not these courses are specific to your major or considered general education. All of these have an impact on our ability to learn, to analyze, to assess, and to be able to be successful in what we do. In short, if your questions or if your exams or your assessments could be Googled, then we need to reevaluate that. My last slide, if it comes up, I love this picture, and I try to use it in all of my presentations, but I really do see this as someone who's being their authentic self, who's seeing themselves as a superhero, regardless of what society sees them as. And I think what's important for us as educators is to make sure that we are talking to this inner person of every one of our students, that they are not a grade, that they are more than their grades, and that the value of their life is not measured by grades. I think that is such an important reminder for our students who are so focused in the competition, in the stress, the anxiety of being able to be the best, of being able to get to whatever the next step is, whether that be graduate school, whether that be landing the perfect job, whatever their next goal is. We need to go back and focus and say, we're here to learn. I'm here to educate. And at the end, you will be able to get back to what your inner self is, because at least for me, it's been a long time since someone looked at my GPA and asked me how I did. They look at the letters after my name and recognize that I worked hard to get there, regardless of what classes I may have passed, failed, gotten C's or A's in. And so with that, I think that I know we have a lot of questions. I wanted to make sure that I've provided some time to do that and just say thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Zema. It's amazing. Regarding the assessment, we do have a lot of things to think about. I believe it's the current challenge for a lot of instructors right now. So now, let me spotlight our speakers and Melissa, and then let's start our Q&A and panel discussion. So we do have some questions from the chat box, from audience, and also from me. I have a lot of things to ask about for your advice and suggestions. So we have first question from Victor, and the question is addressed to Professor Toba. So he said, I agree that we should embrace technology and should encourage our students to learn and use technology to assist them to do their work in schools and corporate work. Instead, as an educator, we should develop assessment that will take into consideration of the tools that students use. How's your view on how we are going to change education and assessment?
This is a great question. Thank you, Victor, for addressing this, because I was hoping really that the pandemic would make us realize that we need to change assessments. Because as I said in my presentation, I think during the pandemic, we had also some concerns about not being there for viewing if students were doing their work. And I think we wasted our time finding proctoring programs. And instead, we should have been designing new learning experiences for students, because the real experience they're going to have in their jobs is having full access to everything. They're going to have full access to GPT. They're going to have full access to any textbook, web page they're going to have. So you may want to block in the exams any other web page, but the reality is that we have to train them to use technology and all this tools smartly, and be smart about how they're using it as tools. And I just want you to entertain the idea that if we overuse ChatGPT, maybe the next war in the world would be just unplugging people from ChatGPT. People who are not going to be able to perform in the world are going to be the ones that have overused that tool without thinking what's behind the technology. So I think we have to teach students the why they have to write their essays, develop their arguments, have a position regarding any argument they're having. Because I think people that are going to be really over artificial intelligence are the ones who are going to be using their intellect more than just making this technology a substitute for thinking. So to answer your question, I think we should be inviting faculty members to rethink how they are designing their classrooms and making students do the work. A great way is for them to assess their work by peers, making a lot of live interviews that require them to think and know people and have real conversations, and not just using databases to make decisions. So there are very creative ways, and I think that could be a topic for a next meeting, just sharing these amazing ideas that we all have as a faculty members to make sure that students are really learning. And I have this big takeaway from Dr. Salma's presentation about if your students can pass your class with ChatGPT, then your class was not worthy. So I think that's a reflection we should all have after this discussion.
Thank you, Professor Tova. Regarding assessment, I think we have another question which is addressed to Dr. Salma. The definition and concept of academic integrity needs to be reassessed. It is not about cheating, but using technology to enhance our work, especially with the development in AI. What is your thought on this?
Well, I think that the concept, and I think that's a great question. I think the concept of academic integrity is truly about giving attribution appropriately and recognizing that attribution does not discredit or diminish the work that you're putting forward, but actually can enhance. If we look at sourced material, one of the reasons that I think we rely so heavily on peer-reviewed material is because there's a trust in the fact that has been looked at by several individuals, trusted individuals. And if you're then citing that as something to support an argument, then I'm more inclined to believe that that's a valid argument. It doesn't mean that I might not disagree with it, but at least I'm thinking how you got there and where the train of thought is. So I think that academic integrity, when we're talking about the use of technology, AI, ChatGPT, in some ways isn't that far off from Wikipedia, encyclopedias, and other sources. But we need to be able to make sure that we are referencing them, attributing where we got the information from, and being critical in our thinking in terms of whether or not that's something that we're going to see as a valid resource, or whether it's something that is it's an interesting point, but maybe needs more research that can be peer reviewed and determined whether or not, with a larger sample size, this is something that can sustain the course of our assertions in terms of its validity.
Thank you, Dr. Zama. My mind just went a little bit beyond teaching and learning, like courses or something. I'm also thinking about how to educate research students, because most of the time I work with the research students. So in their education, I'm thinking about their publications, the peer review process, their research publications. So may I ask Professor Chow and Professor Withers, I'm thinking, is there anything that we should change or we should pay special attention to while the AI tools came out? Anything we should make changes or revise our practice regarding research students' education? Talking about their research, their publishing processes, something like that, instead of just courses. Professor Chow? Sorry, you are muted.
All right. For the research student, I think that I see the direction of research student training these days actually has been going maybe in the wrong directions for a lot of institutions, because actually we focus too much on the publication. And I think it's really, to me, I think it's a bean counting process. And then people see that actually having enough beans being counted on their CV, that helps them. But on the other hand, if you look at all the researchers around the world, those who are successful, not successful, whether they're making impact, not impact, it is not really about the bean counting. It is really about the impact that they make. I would like to use examples that for a lot of the researchers in the past, they don't publish a lot. They publish a few seminal finding, and that they make their name and they make the change of the entire field. And these are the kind of value that actually we need to like advocate more often. On the other hand, it is because of this short-sightedness that we want to look at immediate outcome. Then we don't rely on our own judgment. We rely on the journal impact factors judgment and the number as a judgment. And we say that if you count more, higher impact, that's better. And so I'm not saying that that is totally wrong, but then we overemphasize it too much, and then it skewed entire directions that people simply focus on that number. And they forget about when they all come into this field doing research or so, what they're really longing for is because of their genuine interests about certain topic. They want to uncover the mystery or whatever creative things that they want to make. So that is kind of like skewing the direction of education per se. So if we, as an institution, if we think hard about what we value most, then you certainly would abolish the way that you simply count publication number. You probably focus a lot more on individuals' accomplishment based on the evaluation of their performance on the day-to-day basis. And then I think that the culture would be changed. Now, in one way, that my suggestion is that if we think about all the past training of scholars, it is through the kind of like an apprenticeship. Given that at workplace, when we evaluate individual, maybe in financial institution, they will look at their P&L and see actually how good they do. But on the other hand, if you're really managing an office, managing a company, what you look at is you look at individual, how they perform on a day-to-day basis. On small tasks, big tasks, how they interact with people, and you evaluate a staff, whether they're good or bad. I call that a portfolio. And it's that portfolio that defines individual, rather than a CV with a list of items. So if we go away from this list of items on the CV, then I would say that we probably would be much better off for the graduate students in terms of their training.
Thank you, Professor Chow. Professor Withers?
Yeah, so I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with much of what has already been said, in that I think we need to consider a different way of assessing our students, and we need to think more about real world, real life application, critical thinking. I think there's this trend that we've been studying at the Center for Excellence in Teaching over the past year on what's called ungrading, which is, again, reducing, simply giving some kind of subjective grade that really may not mean a whole lot, and thinking more holistically about the experience of learning. I also think this focus on whether it's publications, even as faculty, discounts the impact that our work may have in the real world. You know, when we go out for promotion, for example, I do work on human trafficking. I have a blog that I write that takes a lot of time, but none of the posts that are on this blog are counted towards my promotional publication scores, because it's just for the public. But yet, in terms of social impact, in terms of the number of readers that are reading this blog and people that are reaching out that are being trafficked, and or policymakers or healthcare providers who are using this information to train their providers on how to identify trafficking victims, those are real world impacts that I think we can't really ignore or discount the value of as much as we have in the past. And I think that applies to you know, research students as well as faculty.
Thank you, Professor Withers. That gives me some thoughts regarding how my work should be done from now on. Something we need to focus on and put less emphasis on the other things. Shift our focus a little bit, focusing on quality instead of quantity. That's the key. So we have another question from the audience. This question is addressed to Professor Chow. Intellectual development is a very important component of education, but it is a long-term assessment. How are we going to design tools to measure intellectual development over short term of the length of the course?
I have to say, intellectual development is not something that you can benchmark and set a bar. You acquire it within a course, acquire it within a year. There are late boomers, there are also fast learners. Some people pick it up fast, some people pick it slow. If as educator in an institution that believe in education, I believe that we should not look at this kind of short-term monitoring, but we should have a continuous monitoring. As long as we can see progress of individuals. So I mentioned earlier that portfolio is one way of the assessment. You look at how individuals perform on different tasks, how they interact, how they put whatever their knowledge into use. Every single bit of it is a measurement. Sometimes I think that I even use an approach, which cannot be scaled up very easily, I have to say, is that every single conversation I have with an individual, I'm doing assessment. Based on what they say, what they talk about, what example they use, how they evaluate others' work, I'm doing assessment. And I would have a rough estimation of how far they have gone. So that's how we guide graduate students or undergrad project students, right? And can I give it a mark? Hardly. I would say it's very subjective. But then it depends on actually where I set the bar as what a university graduate is supposed to do. Then I can make some sort of like a grading, very blurred grading along the way. I think that is how I measure intellectual development. And some people, they may have higher potential than the other. And we also need to admit that as a biologist, I always say that everybody's different. How can we expect everybody to finish the 4-year or 6-year or 8 years in the college? They arrive at the same point doing the same great work. It's impossible. And we need to let students know that, as I think that Jack was talking about this, that they need to accept who they are and understand actually where that limit is. And then they do their best. I would say that they deserve an A grade if they have done that.
Thank you, Professor Chow. Our next question is addressed to all the speakers. Perhaps we also need to rethink our students' understanding of OBE outcome-based assessment, which is emphasized heavily by many universities, and which, according to understanding of many students, emphasizes on what they produce at the end of the day, and not so much on what transpired during the process, the reflection or thinking they have to do while attending the assessment. What are your views on this? The question is in the chat box. So may I invite Professor Toba to start?
Sorry. I think this goes in line with what Dr. Witters was saying about the ungrading thing. We also at Shift Academy, we have entertained a book club to read the book about ungrading, and just talking with faculty members about what's the purpose of having a college education anyways. And I think it's not the students that are over-focused on the grades. I think we are also too afraid of, if we're not focused on the grade, what are we doing inside the class? I think we need to be comfortable with the fact that sometimes learning is enough, and sometimes, as Dr. Chow was saying right now, individuals are so different, and their path about learning and their reflection about their own learning is so different. And the more we standardize this process, the bigger the gap between real learning and the grade is happening. So I think this is a great time with all this new technology to rethink what's the real added value of a university education. Because I asked this question to my students the last week: how many of you go to class and know that you have to go back to a YouTube tutorial to really understand the class, because you know that you're not learning in class, but somehow they're paying the tuition to be there and relying that the learning is happening on YouTube. So I think if we are not designing activities, hands-on activities that really promote high order thinking, that we are making students create, analyze, develop, all this Bloom's taxonomy, right? High order thinking, verbs. I think we're just repeating information in a very inefficient way, because the internet and now ChatGPT provides all this information in a very attractive and well written and presented way. It's not our responsibility to repeat that in any way. So I think the challenge right now is to move away from the fear of doing something different. And I think that is the biggest challenge in academia, making faculty members move away from their comfort zone. And at least for me in Shift Academy, that it's probably something that happens to you too. Also, Professor Witters with the Center in Excellence in Teaching, is how to make faculty members try something different. And then also look at the learning curve from students, that as human beings, we are not comfortable to doing things different. So students are going to reject at the beginning these activities. They're not going to like doing the work. And sometimes they're even going to complain and say, I don't like this new Claudia that's giving me some activities to do. I want you to explain. And they are sometimes going to resist this active learning proposal, that it's actually going to add value to their professional development, to become better, not only professionals, but sometimes better citizens, better communicators, better human beings. So that's, I think, the biggest challenge, overcoming the portal of comfort zone.
Thank you, Professor Toba. May I invite Dr. Selma?
Yeah, you know, I don't really have much more to add. I think that grades and assessment, when it comes to that, you know, that's certainly not something that I often defer to the faculty to make a determination as to how it's best to assess the work in their classroom. But I do think that there is great value, as I mentioned, if there are ways for us to avoid focusing as much emphasis on grades and more on learning, and really kind of reevaluating what that means. What is the information that we are hoping our students will take with them beyond the classroom? Why is that important? And how do we emphasize that? I think that would be the best way moving forward. And I think that when we're really talking about learning, we're getting out of the scope of any kind of technology that's going to be providing with it. Because I think that Dr. Tobar in their presentation did a great job of being able to understand that ChatGPT is not thinking; it is predicting. It is providing the most likely set of responses based on the input that's been provided, and that is oftentimes inaccurate, grossly inaccurate, and sometimes what looks to be just very creative and just made up. I encourage you, if you haven't done this already, play with ChatGPT. Ask it to write yourself a bio. See what comes up. You'll be fascinated. You might have graduated from universities that you never attended. It is quite fun.
Thank you, Dr. Zelma. Yes, ChatGPT can be fun to play with, but regarding our research work courses, we have to pay more attention. Professor Chow, please.
All right, so I have to declare, I think that I was not a believer of OBE at the very beginning, and I become a OBE preacher for the past 10 years. And then now I'm abandoning it again. From my understanding, I think that the beauty of OBE, the outcome-based education, is really focusing on redefine clearly what we want to achieve. And then we design our instructions as well as assessment accordingly. But then whether that objective is being set, sometimes we call that the intending learning outcome, is really what we want, and whether the instructions and all the material we provide and the educational experience is really fulfilling that, I have a lot of doubt, because for a majority of the instructors, actually, I have to admit, other than some in some faculty of education or so, that they have received all the trainings in that background. A lot of the faculties in different departments or so, actually, they have not really received enough educational training. And so they don't understand too much about that. And so they're basically learning on the job based on what their own experience is. And so therefore, that definition of outcome become very vague and obscure in a way. Now, one thing that defining that, I think that is important, what that objective we want to achieve. And so if we highlight, when I say the different university, what they focus on, then if that objective has been clearly stated in all the courses, that would be very helpful. On the other hand, OBE also does not require people to assess every single outcome. Some of them are experienced that some students would be able to acquire it faster and some people would be able to acquire it slower. And so therefore, we don't necessarily need to assess all of them, but then we need to provide that opportunity for them. But then you need to design your entire class and educational experience accordingly to fit that purpose. So therefore, I don't think that OBE need to be revised too much in a way, but then we need to have a better understanding of what it's supposed to do. Now, having that said, and I believe that, as I pointed out, faculty, instructors in a higher education or even in secondary, in high schools or so, I don't think that it's just a job that you come in and simply deliver a class or deliver a course. It's not like that. They need to have an understanding of actually what they want to achieve at the end as an educator, because no matter how, I still call a university is an educational institution. So the primary role is education. So they need to have a good understanding of what education is really about and need to understand how the participants, the individuals, what kind of background, what kind of cultural background, their upbringing, their character. We need to cater for this individual. The only problem that I really have now is that how to scale it up. And we are at this juncture, or maybe not at this juncture, we've been in this juncture for too long. After the Industrial Revolution, we always talk about mass production, standardization. And yet, that somehow, I have to say that the basically allows you to provide opportunity for a lot of people to go through this education experience. But at the same time, actually returns the opportunity for many individuals that they would have a much better potential if we leave them free to explore a lot more. So how to balance that? I don't have a good solution at this point, but maybe differentiation of institution, that some institution focus a little bit more on one versus the other, that may be a way to do it. But unfortunately, I think right now, a lot of institutions, they're competing for the same goal, particularly when the ranking agency comes and they try to pose certain criteria, then everybody try to fit in. And that essentially standardize everybody. And that is going to be something, I think, harmful in long term.
Thank you, Professor Chow. So we start with the ChatGPT, and we want to address today's issue, but we also want to look beyond ChatGPT because tomorrow we may have some other challenges. That's the goal of this webinar and also the goal of our working group. So it's time for us to end the webinar. Before I leave, may I invite Professor Withers to give us the closing speech?
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much to our speakers for those really insightful talks and good reminders about what we really need to prioritize and how to better support students and design assessments that are going to discourage cheating and encourage critical thinking. So, and also I'd like to thank Dr. Xiao for chairing our group and for co-organizing this, and also to everyone who attended. So thanks so much, and I hope to see you again at a future APRU Global Health event. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Please check our website. We're going to post our events on the website from time to time. Thank you. Good night. Have a good day for those in Asia or Europe.
Thank
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.